Dr. Wallace has lectured on many modern health issues, including holistic health, attitudinal healing, therapeutic touch, dream work, and spiritual psychology. Our current focus is on spirit-centered mind-body wellness. The session today is going to be recorded by Dr. Wallace, so that I just wanted to make sure you all are aware of that. And if you would like to please welcome Dr. Wallace.
Well, thank you all very much. It's truly a delight to be here. Is this volume good for all of you? All right. I may periodically go wandering around the stage, so if ever comes a time you're not hearing me, just let me know. All right. Well, I'm delighted to be here for quite a number of reasons, not the least of which is that I perceive that any of us who work with the elderly have a deep mission. I think that it's an act of kindness and a little bit of a break from the norm in our culture, in our societal culture, to be willing to embrace deeply the work of dealing with the elderly and the issues, the unique issues that they bring to us. Those of us who work with the elderly know better than this, but really in our society, particularly in America, in the commercialized America, there's a tendency to think of individuals as they age as sort of entering this homogenized, gray, metamorphed lump of something that they really would like to keep out of view and certainly out of mind. It's very close to death. You know, it's one or the other. Either we die or we get older. And neither of those options are things that really people really want to think about very much. So they put it out of mind as much as possible. And the way they put it out of mind is to keep the aged isolated and as much out of view as possible. And of course that's a deep disservice. Those of us who work with the elderly know better. There's very much sort of a teen-based sameness that individuals, all of us really in our youth, in some way wanted so much to be like everybody else. And so there's a lot of effort. I mean, I think today's version of that is that your piercing needs to be somewhat in the same spot as your best friend or something like that, or your tattoo. I'm not sure what the thing is now. But at any rate, there tends to be a real sort of almost fierce independence of spirit that starts to show up as people age. And so many of the tasks that I talk about when I review the tasks of the elderly, even though there are similar tasks that we all have to go through, the fact is that the individuals who go through them are widely different in the way they go about it. And so that's one of the deep gifts that we have in working with the elderly, is we get to sink more deeply into that awareness of the variety of ways that we can be as we get older. So I thought that I would start out first just actually by reviewing and talking a little bit about what is mind-body medicine. What exactly does that mean? And then my intent is to review the tasks of the elderly, and then I will weave all of that together and talk about how we as caregivers who work with the elderly can apply these principles in our work. Now, I'm assuming actually everyone here is working with the elderly, or you wouldn't be in a gerontology conference. Is that true? All right. Okay, everybody's either nodding or raising your hand. Okay, so talking about mind-body medicine, I thought, now I have to wander a little bit here. I'm not a static personality. I thought I would actually share a story about a patient that I saw a number of years ago, and actually I was filling in with for another physician at that time. And there was on the patient roster a woman who I was scheduled to see who was elderly, who I noticed in reviewing her chart had pneumonia several times in that past year, 3 or 4 times. And I thought, now, isn't that interesting? I wonder what's going on, because nowhere in her chart could I find, prior to that, a history of respiratory illness or definitely not pneumonia. So I thought, now I wonder what's going on here. I mean, that seemed to me like a clue that there was something, either a deficiency in the immune system or some sort of exposure or something that needed attention beyond just treating the pneumonia. So I decided that I would spend a little extra time with her and try to dig to the bottom of this. Well, to cut to the chase, really the only thing that she could think of that was different or that had happened roughly a year ago was that her husband had died. Now, as it turned out, this woman had no other extended family. And I really got the sense that she had never really grieved the loss of her husband. She had definitely not talked about it with anyone. She didn't have anybody to talk to. And she was of the mindset which many people of the older generation relative to us have, which is that being stoic is a very important thing. Being strong means that you don't express your emotions and so on and so forth. And so she was trying very hard to live her life in that manner. But the truth was that she had never grieved the loss of her husband. So we spent the better part of half an hour just crying. Actually, I held her and we both cried a little bit, but she cried a lot. And I absolutely know that that event had everything to do with her ongoing, recurring, infectious respiratory illnesses. And we have a number of paradigms in which we could explain that in a sort of rational way. Fortunately, now in scientific Western American parlance, there is a field of science called psychoneuroimmunology. Any of you have heard of that? Psychoneuroimmunology. And you pick that apart and you get a sense of what it means, psychoneuroimmunology. And you know, it was a real big deal a number of years ago when we discovered the neurochemicals, the chemicals in the brain that serve as messengers from one neuron to another. Well, the latest big deal, really, is that on the white blood cells, the immune system cells, the defense system of our bodies, are also receptor sites, specifically for neurochemicals. Now, at one time, of course, we thought that neurochemicals were completely confined to the nervous system. As it turns out, there's a rich interplay of conversation going on inside of our body between the brain chemistry and the immune system of the body, along with everything else. But in this case, talking about the immune system, in point of fact, one of the many things that has been discovered in this rich field of science so far is that in conditions of stress, when the neurochemicals of the nervous system, such as adrenaline and epinephrine and so on and so forth, are upregulated, they insert into the receptor sites in the white blood cells in such a way that the white cells are downregulated. So in point of fact, we now have scientific proof for what we always knew, which is that when we're stressed, our immune system is down and it's more likely to catch diseases. I like to compare, I'm trained also in Oriental medicine, and that paradigm oftentimes explains things in a holistic way that Western American medicine, which is really in its infancy, hasn't quite caught up to yet. So I will also share that paradigm as a focus of explanation for how it is that this woman might be having so many bouts of pneumonia after having the severe grief and loss of her husband. As it turns out, the meridian, how many of you are familiar somewhat with, a lot of you are not, wow, this is way cool. I'm talking to my partners here. The meridian that has to do in its, first of all, in Oriental medicine, meridian awareness, there is a deep understanding that our body and mind are not separate. I mean, really, that's so artificial, isn't it? Body, mind. I feel so odd sometimes trying to talk to people about the body-mind connection as if they're separate. It's very artificial, incredibly artificial. And so most other cultures, particularly those that are more ancient, that come from a spiritual background to start with, have a recognition that there is no separation to start with. And so when we talk about meridians, automatically we're talking about not only a tissue organ function, but we're also talking about an emotional state and a relationship with environment and a relationship that that person has with life and other people. So as it turns out, the meridians that have to do in their balanced state with letting go and receiving in a balanced sort of a way, when that meridian is out of balance, it reflects in states of grief, sorrow, and it turns out that is the lung and large intestine, but in this case the lung meridian, which reflects in tissue organ disease as diseases of the respiratory system. So again, in this paradigm, in Oriental medicine paradigm, we see a clear picture of how all of these pieces might have fit together. So beyond the rich interplay of the mind, the spirit, and the emotions, a concept of holistic health really also embraces the awareness that to be wholly healthy, we also have to be mindful of and address the interconnections of the person with environment and the person in relationship. So the person's place in society and the person's concept of themselves in all of those relationships. All of those facets go into a statement of health and well-being. And so, you know, one of the interesting facets of our culture right now, and I very much don't want to do a comparison better than, worse than kind of thing. To the point, there are certain elements to be gained by the reductionistic approach, which by and large our scientific model has adopted. And there are definitely, there's information to be gained by reducing things to its smaller and smaller element. There are also things to be gained by broadening the picture and looking at the overall, you know, interplay of how things work. So by nature, the randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blinded study, which we've all accepted as the golden mean for the scientific proof of things, is designed to weed out everything except for that one piece of data that we're trying to figure out whether it's relevant or not. Well, by definition, you see, you've weeded out all of that rich interplay. Why do we do that, by the way? I just think this is quite fascinating. Why do we control experiments with a placebo? Anybody know? Has anybody really thought about this? Why do we double blind? Yeah, there's some great smiles out there, so I know some of you have thought about this. The reason we do that is that if a person knows what it is they're getting, it influences the outcome. Well, why is that? Why is that? Furthermore, if the person who is giving the chemical to a patient knows what it is, even if the patient doesn't know what it is, it influences the outcome. Double-blinded, that's what that means. So what are we saying here? So we do everything in our power to get rid of all those influences for the purposes of experimentation, which is good, because if we're going to be introducing chemistry into another person's body, we ought to know that it authentically has an impact and an effect beyond what the relationship does. However, in real life, in practice, in our interactions, we are not to get rid of those influences. We are to be mindful of them. We are to be aware that they're there, because they are. We do not treat one another and share our lives together under placebo-controlled, randomized, well, sometimes I think it's pretty randomized, but at any rate, it's not placebo-controlled environments. We do influence one another constantly. And it is as we embrace that awareness that we become ever much wiser about how we are with one another. And we can, in fact, start to harness that as part of our therapy. As part of our therapy. All right, so then I thought the next thing I would do is talk about what are the stages of the tasks of the elderly. As we Is this still loud enough? As we age, what matters shifts. That's not all the shifts, but that's a different conversation. As we age, what matters shifts. Okay, our priorities change. So as I mentioned earlier, when we're in our teens, when we're in our early youth, there's a real drive to figure out how we fit in. And so there's some effort to be a lot alike. You know, and there's a real attention sort of to the superficial level of things. Appearance a great deal. If any of you recall the zit that broke out right before a date and the terrific horror that caused, you know, there's a real attention to that sort of level of reality. And then we enter a phase that actually most of us are in right now, where our attention is very much wrapped up in taking care of business, tasks, earning a living, caring for the elderly, perhaps our parents, caring for children, really attending to the day-to-day tasks. And particularly in these days, busyness really does seem to be equated with worth in some manners, so that there tends to be a lot of busyness that fills our days. And sooner or later, however, things slow down enough that we really start to introspect and ask ourselves deeper questions. Now, there are a lot of different things that can actually provoke this. For some of us, there's a spiritual quest that may have been going on for many, many, many years, so it doesn't necessarily have to be associated with aging. Some people lose limbs, lose the life of a dear loved one, lose a function in life that they've had for a long time. In some way, it's forced upon them to sit back and start to reflect at a deeper level. But sooner or later, all of us will start to introspect and ask ourselves the deeper questions. But there comes a time that it's as if a deep inner part of ourselves is yearning to be acknowledged and recognized and sort of let out beyond the busyness. And this is the task. I mean, most of us who took psychology learned that one of the main tasks of the elderly is to review their life. And I'm going to be breaking that down into more detail about what does that mean. But there comes a time when indeed that is what happens. And let's just review here what the tasks are of the elderly. First of all, on a very practical level, just in simple pragmatic terms, there is a need to wrap up the business of living. So there needs to be attention to things like drawing up a will. There's a reflection on what are my possessions, who do I want to pass what on to. There are thoughts about what are my debts or what are my concerns, what are the legacies I'm going to pass on, and how am I going to attend to it? How do I protect the people who will be left behind? You know, one of the things, I wasn't actually going to talk about this, but it occurs to me, this is kind of important, particularly in Oregon, because of our ability to provide medication for people to end their lives by choice. That is a laden field, which I'm not going to go into deeply, but I do want to comment that one of the things that we must attend to in our culture is the awareness of concern that the elderly have about the debts that they will leave for the people behind them. I was speaking with a physician from the Netherlands, where some of you may know they, although it's not legal, they do not frown on assisted suicide, assisted euthanasia in the Netherlands. And so it's quite a common practice there, actually. However, what we need to know is that in the Netherlands, as soon as a person is defined or recognized to be terminally ill, ipso facto, they become a ward of the state, meaning the state, the country, pays for every single bill. So it's a given that there will be no debts left for the dearly beloved who are left behind. And one of the realities is, as people age, they start to really feel this sense of responsibility, and they think about what is it they're going to leave behind. And they try to attend to that in a way that some of us might not have thought of. in a conscientious manner. A second task is that we start to face our mortality, much more than just hypothetically. Even just on the biological plane, things that we take for granted as simply trying to keep ourselves maximally productive have a completely different spin on it. So, for example, a young person who, including any of us really, who go to the physician with a sore throat or an upset stomach might be a bit irritated by that fact and just be looking for treatment to take care of it. Those very same symptoms in individuals who are aging may have a very different spin. It may mean something very different to them. Because for the first time, we will start to think about, what does the symptom mean? I mean, thoughts of cancer, thoughts of heart attack. Chest pain doesn't just mean overexertion or stress. It means something different. So things that we just take for granted have a much different meaning and a spin. And that's something I think we need to be mindful of and be thoughtful of as we are working with the people who seem to be overreacting about one thing or another. In their reality base, there may be a point of fact in their concern. A statement I hear, actually I say sometimes, is, I feel like the same old person on the inside, but I look in the mirror and I'm shocked at what I see there. And of course that has an impact on the psyche of the people as they age too. I mean, obviously, literally, physically, the appearance is changing, and on the inside they're still familiar with themselves as they used to be. But we get feedback from those around us and from the mirror itself about the changes that we're going through. A third task is closely connected, but there is a tendency to start considering what is next. It's one thing to have a deep faith about an afterlife and to have a sense of comfort about that even. But, boy, it's really different when you're right there. It's like all of a sudden. It reminds me of, I'm not sure if it's fair to make this comparison, but it reminds me of the time I decided to go skiing. And it really seemed like a great idea, and it looked like a terrific lot of fun, people whizzing by right and left. But by golly, I got on that contraption thing and got to the top of the hill, and there I was looking down. I think that might be death. And there was no way out. I had to go down. So I did a lot. But the point is that when you're really there, of course, there's no way, unless we actually have faced death, and unless we have truly believed that we are dying, there is no way we can possibly know what a person is going through who is facing that as a reality. So that's a third very important task that we need to be mindful of, I think, as we work with people who are getting close to that time. Fourth task is considering the lessons of life. What is the meaning of all of this, anyhow? It's very common to talk about the midlife crisis. And for many people, that is when that question first really kabams into their life. Because sooner or later, we have to have a context for all this stuff we're doing. Or we get depressed. And depression is actually very common in the elderly. Well, there are a lot of reasons for that. One, of course, is what I've alluded to earlier, which is that as we lose the function which defined our meaning in life for much of our life, there's a big void there. But even without that, there is this tendency as things slow down, as there's less busyness in our life, and we start to introspect, we have to really have a context, a meaning that makes sense enough that it's worth getting up in the morning and doing our life. There was a real interesting study, actually, another speaker shared with me a while back, done on a group of chimpanzees. Now, I'm not exactly sure how they figured out these chimpanzees were depressed, but somehow or another, they researchers determined that roughly 10% of this population of chimps, and this was a wild population out in the wild, they estimated roughly 10% of these chimps were depressed. So they removed that 10% from the population, and the hypothesis was that by removing that 10%, that probably another 10% of the chimp population would show signs of depression. So that was the hypothesis. So they took that 10% and they disappeared, and then they went back in a few months to evaluate this herd or tribe or whatever you call a group of chimps to see what had happened. Well, lo and behold, they were all gone. They had all died. They'd all been killed, as far as they can tell. So what in heaven's name happened? Well, the conjecture is that 10% of the population of chimps who were depressed by appearances represented those individuals in the tribe who were the most sensitive. They were the sensitives. They were the ones who had the capacity to intuit or be aware of things that were amiss. And so they were the internal guidance system for the tribe. They were the ones that overreacted or reacted appropriately to impending danger. So I'm quite convinced that in our population, as humanoid creatures, that people who are sensitives through their life, and in particular kind of at the ends of the spectrum of our life, when busyness is not what occupies our receptor anodes all the time, are those who are most likely to give us a clue about how our society is faring. And indeed, depression is a real problem amongst the elderly in our culture. And it would behoove us, I think, actually, to just take time out and say, why might that be? Beyond the obvious. Indeed, why might that be? Another task that comes up as we age is reflecting on what we have done and, in counterpoint, what we have left undone. And thinking about what we have done can either bring a sense of satisfaction and completion, or, and this is another task actually, the need to face regrets. The need to face regrets. So looking at that sort of overall basket of things that we've done and left undone. You know, I became aware for the first time in my early 40s that there was a thing on my list of things I wanted to do that I'm really and truly not going to do in this lifetime. I really, probably, really won't do it. And that is, I really always thought I was going to go skydiving. I even had arranged it twice, and each time, I think probably I really have an angel of serendipity protecting me more than anything, but something happened each time. The first time, the woman who was going to go out with me went out the weekend before and disappeared in the woods, never was found again. That should have warned me, but no, indeed. The second time, there was an accident at the place where I was signed up to go in a month, and some people, their chutes didn't open, and they ended up in the parking lot. Well, at any rate, I decided, I looked at my bird, and I said, you know, I think I'm just not going to do that in this life. I'm going to put that aside. But that was a real sense of sensation I'd never had before, this concept of there are things I'm not going to do. I had the capacity to think about it, and I'm not going to do it. Now, there's some things I think about that I've never thought of doing. Bungee jumping, for instance, it has never crossed my mind beyond. But, you know, as people age, there comes this time when that list of things they really thought they were going to do start falling off. Now, of course, that can go back to the depression camp, among other things, but there has to be some sense of resolution about this. So the things that are left undone or done. So then looking at the things that have been done, there's that whole field of regrets. I'm struck in my counseling practice by the number of times individuals have express to me their frustration that they really wish they could talk with their parents about one thing or another that they feel so unhappy about, but they don't feel like it's probably worth doing because there's not a receptivity there and they can't listen, they can't talk anyway, and yada, yada, yada. And then when they really do make that effort, those who have the courage or whatever it takes to do it, they are shocked. They come back to me and they just express this incredible gladness that they made that effort because they're shocked at how open their parents were. They couldn't believe it's like a different person and blah, blah, blah. Well, indeed, as we age and we start to reflect on the things that we have done and left undone, and we face our own regrets, there opens up in individuals a deep desire also to resolve things. I mean, there's human beings, for crying out loud, who were stuck in their busyness at one point and now are in a time of their life. This is the task. This is a task. A time of their life when they really long to resolve the things that, of course, they're aware of, that they would have been different. And so that is a task. That is a task of getting older. You know, really, issues of the soul surface as we get older. I like to think of it that way. And so very closely tied to the issue of facing regrets is a task as we get older, this is for all of us, is a desire to seek forgiveness. And again, there are many layers and many different sort of dimensions to this, but seeking forgiveness in a deeply meaningful way. You know, there's no accident that many of the people in church are the older generation. At any rate, there is a desire, truly, to seek forgiveness and to make amends and to set things right. You know, it's sort of like a permanent change of address, and you really want everything to be okay when you leave. Those are the kinds of thoughts, of course, that cross our mind as we look at this possibility of leaving this planet. All right. So the question then to us as caregivers, first of all, I think before I go on to this next topic, because all of you have worked with the elderly, I'm quite curious to glean from your wisdom any other tasks that perhaps you have thought of or things that you've noticed in working with people as they're aging that might benefit the group by your sharing. Any other? Yes, sir.
I think one thing is to let people know explicitly that they are loved.
Yes.
And to know explicitly from those people that the elderly person, is indeed loved and respected.
Yes, yes. And I'm going to get actually to that, but to repeat it, it's worth saying it many times over, that an important facet of aging, an important thing to deal with, is to let them know that they're loved and to let them express that, in fact, they do love as well. Yeah, that's very beautiful. You just took my whole punchline of the whole talk, but that's all right. All right. Anything else that anybody would like to? Yes.
Along with what you said about coming to grips with things that you'll never do, what I see with a lot of the folks that I've worked with is the desire to try things they never thought they would.
Yes. Excellent. Oh, I'm so glad you said that, actually, because I failed to write that down and therefore didn't think of it, and it's a very good point. Could you all hear what she said? Bob, did that pick up on the tape? Should I repeat? Okay. So what she said, and fill in if I screw this up, but another very important thing, along with the things of what is the awareness of what is done and what is left undone, is sometimes this burning desire that wakes up to do things that they had never even thought of before, to really try something different. And that, too, is just a beautiful facet of aging, because, again, as we let go of the busyness that many times really is foisted upon us by those around us, society or children or whatever, as that drops away for the first time, as we sink into that sense of ourselves, there might awaken a passion to accomplish something that indeed we can do. And this is our time, baby, to do it. So as caregivers, I think really providing as much support to that facet. And that is probably one of the best ways to overcome depression that there is, really. Yeah, indeed. I'm so glad you said that. Anything else? Yes,
One of the things in my practice that I notice is that many of the elderly have an anger, a bitterness about for children or their parents, spouses.
Yes.
That really begins to come to light
Yes.
as they age.
Yes,
And
it's very
what
good.
I try to do is help them to resolve that.
Thank you, indeed. So another excellent point, and this actually ties in with the reality, the recognition that as we age, the differences actually become more pronounced. So, if you think you're going to be a whole lot different when you're older than you are now, look at how you are now, spin a trajectory, magnify it, that's how you're going to be. So whatever you left unresolved now is going to get worse. Sorry. Deal with it now while you're still really pliable. But it is true that along that trajectory, the individuals we work with as they age, and you all know this, there are some who are so deeply content, and we know, oh man, there's wisdom there I really want to learn from. And there are others who are brittle and angry, really resentful, have not dealt with the issues, and it's become concretized. And so there's a bitterness there that just eats away, and oh my, inside of them, the acidic eating away is so dreadful. So the gift that we can give is realizing that that's unresolved issues and being present for that, not buying it, not supporting the pathology, supporting them in it, and hoping there's still a spark of life in there enough to burn through it, burn through the dross. That's a very good point. And that's a sadness. It's a sadness that every one of it. Now I'm getting towards the end of my talk here, but it's important to recognize that where we are now is the time to resolve those issues that will indeed, by trajectory, only be magnified as we get older. And that's actually one of the gifts we have by the way of working with people who are older, is we can wake up to that awareness while we're young. Let's take one more, and then I'm going to move on. I saw a hand over here. Yeah.
In terms of tasks of the elderly that I work with, one thing that I see again and again in my people is this: they express this sense of being burdened and being useless.
Yes.
And what I see is this giant need for them to feel useful.
Yes.
And they don't know how to
Yes.
ride that.
Yes, I'm going to get to that. That's very excellent. Again, talking about the reasons for so much depression and the search for meaning in life and so on and so forth. What was expressed here that is seen often is this sense of uselessness. Like, what good am I anyhow? And indeed, I'm going to reiterate, so many of us, all of us really, get our sense of meaning from the function that we play. And by definition, in this world where our jobs have a beginning and end, and then there's retirement, and then that function is gone, then that sense of meaning is gone. And there is no reason to live if there's no meaning. Who amongst us would possibly want to get up if our concept of ourselves is that we're a burden, and that really all we are is there's this lump that other people have to take care of? So I'm going to, again, spin ahead a little bit here. It's worth saying now that as caregivers, one of the best and deepest and most wonderful gifts that we can give to those that we care for is to not go in as a caregiver at all, but instead to reflect upon what is the essence and the beauty and the grace of this living human being inside of the anger, inside of this aging body, and relate to that. Relate to that blessed human being. That's the best gift you can possibly give. Really, it is. I mean, I hate feeling like somebody's taking care of me. I just bristle. Probably one of the worst patients on the planet Earth, but I mean, do you really? Do you want? Ugh, right. Okay, so let's look then at ourselves as caregivers in all of this. And see how all this fits. See how we can fit all these considerations, all these things we've talked about into the busyness of our schedule and make this relevant for us. Because, I mean, the truth is we really are still in a different phase of our life. And we can't get away from that. I mean, we're in the phase of our life where being busy is part of our life. Now, there are ways we can address that and adjust it as we become more mindful and awake to what matters. But the truth is, this is we're in the prime of our life, as it were. And so this is the time that we make a living and take care of business. The other thing is that, truthfully, our healthcare system in this country, technology-driven, is very much focused on keeping people alive at all cost. And by cost, I don't just mean economic cost. I mean psychological and biological cost as well. And so there's not a whole lot of support for kind of taking care of the non-essentials, the soft, mushy stuff that make us all feel good and like life is worth living. And so this is the arena within which we're doing our caregiving and our therapy. But as has been mentioned already, one of the things we can do is see what we can learn from the elderly from where we are now. That's one of the gifts. One of the gifts and the opportunities of working with the elderly is to think about what really matters now. I attended a continuing medical education conference for physicians not too long ago. And the entire focus of this particular workshop I was at was the medication of our nation's youth. The medication of our nation's youth. And the contention of the speaker was that it's actually a pretty good idea to start treating youngsters at a pretty early age for inattentiveness, behavior problems, this whole sort of ADHD epidemic that's going on, that it's a good idea to treat these kids early. He was talking 2 years old. And the reason for that is that it's important to have these kids primed and capable of attending to the tasks of school by the time they get there, so they can be pumped out the other end as truly productive members of our society rather than delinquents. Well, I had a little bit of aversion to this talk through the whole hour, sort of squirming around in my seat. And though at the end of the talk I raised my hand and I said, all right, now you indicated early on in the talk that there's an epidemic of inattentiveness and behavior problems in our society's youth right now. What is the conjecture as to the cause? What is the root of this problem? And I'm really glad I asked the question, because he suddenly became very animated. This clearly was dear to his heart. I have no idea why he didn't talk about it. But what he said, his answer is social isolation. Social isolation. We know from studies that it is essential for adequate neurochemical development of a child's brain to have eye-to-eye contact, face-to-face contact with human beings. That is essential for adequate neurochemical development. And we have become a culture that replaces relationships with things. Things. So most kids are in a crib filled with plastic bright things with very good intentions, mind you. The idea being to develop the intellect of the brain and so on and so forth. But it does not replace. It does not replace face-to-face, eye-to-eye, warm, cozy contact. Doesn't replace it. Probably all of you who've had psychology training are familiar with the old studies done with the little baby monkeys. Yes, you're all nodding. Anybody not know this study? Okay, then I'll say it. There was one hand. The study that was done with baby monkeys, wherein they provided all the basic needs for these baby monkeys, feeding them and so on and so forth. But the baby monkeys became neurotic, and the control group of monkeys that had access to warm, cuddly body to cuddle up with, even without food, chose the warm, cuddly situation, even above food. And the personality development was completely different. Well, this is true for our babies too, for crying out loud. Why would we think they're any different? And so why do I mention this in a workshop on the elderly? Well, you know, social isolation, I'm absolutely convinced, is the root cause of very, 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 very much of our society's ills at all ages, our age too. I mean, to the extent that busyness is replacing meaningful relationships in our lives, there's a part of our spirit that's suffering. You betcha. And it's more pronounced in the elderly because they don't have the busyness even to distract themselves anymore, by and large. So, social isolation. And so, again, what does this have to do with us as therapists and providers? Well, we need to look at the tasks and the traps of the phase of the life that we're in, and then be very, very aware that the stresses of the busyness of our life, and also, again, acknowledging that the context of healthcare in which we're working, not only is there a focus on keeping people alive as long as possible, but there's also a sinister sort of focus on productivity that has ventured into healthcare. Now, I don't know if all of you are as susceptible to this as physicians are. Do you have a quota that you have to meet, a certain number of patients that you have to see? You do, as counselors. You see, this is a factory model. This is a factory model, isn't it? It's like the widget model. Volume is what defines worth. So I'm not here to be able to fix that, but I think we really have to be aware of it as a profound influence and impact on the kind of work that we do that really matters. Because widgets, plastic, bright things in the crib, these things do not satisfy. They do not really solve the issues and the pains of the soul. So again, I want to reiterate that one of the great joys of working with older folks is that if we're really paying attention, if we listen to what they have learned and what we can gain from them, we can, in fact, change our priorities, shift our focus, gain the perspective that they have to share with us. The awareness does matter. The awareness does matter. So this is what I would propose. I would propose that we start thinking now about what we will be reflecting on as we get older as having been what really mattered. What will we wish that we had done more of? What will we wish that we had done less of? And start thinking about it now while we have the youth and the time to respond. You know, often at the time of death, any of you work with people who are dying? Yes, indeed. So you know what I'm about to say is true. There are really only a couple of questions. Really only a couple of questions that come up at the time of death, or as people start to really think that they're approaching that time. The first is, did I love enough? Did I demonstrate my love enough? And the second is, did I learn to live wisely, or variation on that? Did I live my life? Did I use the gifts that I came here with? Because, oh my God, if we're approaching death and we haven't, oh, what a waste. Who else has this life that you have? Who else? It's so short. It's so short. That's a terrible regret to have. Now is the time to start asking this question. Now is the time. And the magic of it, the magic of this, is that if you do that now, you will, ipso facto, be the best possible caregiver that you are capable of being. You see, this is the magic. Mind-body medicine is kind of fun this way. You know, you cannot just sort of learn about this and then do it to somebody else. It doesn't work like that. It's not a memorization thing. Mind-body medicine by its nature, requires that we ask of ourselves, that we attend to the issues inside of ourselves, so that as we deal with our own heart and our own issues, it goes out like ripples, and it has the effect on everyone around us. That's how it works. So a mind-body practitioner or a counselor who has that sort of spin on life has as their primary work, really their only work, doing the internal job. Yes, ma'am.
Something that I've remembered throughout my nursing career was a huge pearl of wisdom that one of my instructors gave me. And she said that if you remember nothing else, remember that a feeling of dis-ease leads to disease.
Uh-huh.
And she said if you think of that in the focus of your own life, you pass that on to others.
Indeed. Indeed.
Whether you do it positively or negatively.
Yes. Yes.
And that's,
yes. You know what feels really good is I feel like you all have my script. So to repeat what she said, and I'm going to repeat it later in my own way, is that the notion of a pearl of wisdom that one of her nursing instructors gave her is that dis-ease leads to disease. And that indeed, if we have that within ourselves, it goes out like a ripple to those around us. And in counterpoint, a sense and feeling of ease or grace or whatever you want to call it also influences those around us. And what better way? I mean, you know, this is like a win-win-win, massive win situation. So as we attend to the wellness of one another, we must really constantly ask ourselves these deeper questions if we are to effect actual change, because awareness does matter. It is what influences all that we do. Now, and again, I want to reiterate, this is not meant to add yet one more layer of guilt or responsibility on you. It's really quite the opposite. This is a very joyful message. This is the take-home message. This really is the take-home message. When we attend to what keeps us peaceful, the kindness of our heart, we are truly in ever greater service as an act of kindness to those around us. That is the take-home message. So how do we do that? How do we do that in the space of busyness? Well, all right, I was going to answer my own question, but I've got an answer in the audience. Great, yes?
You said you have to listen to what they're saying.
Yes.
You have to show that you are listening to them and you are understanding what they're saying.
Yes.
And that you feel what they feel.
And so the one answer is to listen deeply to what people are saying, to really resonate and let them know of what you're feeling. And I would add to that, and I would have actually as a very central focus, is that we listen to our own preferences for peace. So imagine this. Imagine having a filter, a framework, so that every single decision, every choice that you make in life goes through the filter, the question in your mind, what is the most peaceful choice here? What is the choice that is kind to everyone involved? To everyone involved. What would the choice be? And I guarantee you, if you have that filter that you make your decisions through, you will be ever more peaceful, ever kinder, and ever more effective in the work that you do. It will, it's a guarantee. It cannot help but. This is how you work through your issues, and you become the filter through which what comes from you to others is the most effective, the most blessed, and a deep gift for the people you work with. And it's, like I said, win-win-win, because you're in the middle of this peace. You're the center of peace, you see. To the extent that we are kind to ourselves, we do find the ripple extending out to whomever we meet. And unfortunately, I have to say, I'm going to remind us, the same is true if we're in distress. You know, we really can't fake the appearance of It doesn't work like that. Have you ever been with someone who sort of had a calm exterior, but you were wondering why your own stomach was in turmoil when you're sitting next to them? It really does influence those around us, if there's something in us that we have not attended to. But, you know, one of my colleagues, who I want to thank, she's actually here, once recently referred to busyness as an act of violence. It's true, isn't it? I think about how I feel inside of me and the way I sort of behave towards people when I'm just too darn busy to give a care. It's like my immediate reaction is, get out of my face, get out of my space. You know, and there's that feeling like that. Well, we're too busy. We get too busy, and so we become unkind. We feel unkind to ourselves, and we therefore act unkind to others, even if we grit our teeth and try to make it okay. You know, of course people respond to that. And then the irony of this, of course, is that when people have that sense, they feel like there's something missing and they try even harder to connect. And what you really want is just to be left alone. So busyness really is, you know, it's an amazing realization, really. It's kind of, and I don't mean this as a harshness, but I think we need to think about it. It's an amazing realization when we discover the ways in which our caregiving can actually be aggressive. You know, if we're so hell-bent on figuring out what to do to or for somebody else without ever really pausing in that quiet, reflective, really state of reverence and appreciation for who this person is, we do run the risk of just sort of bowling right over who they are, you know, really doing transgression. That there is that risk. I mean, how many of us have felt fairly convinced that we really know better for somebody what's good for them than they do? Okay, then. Yeah. So, and you know, it's the most vulnerable. It's the ill, the elderly, the young, who get the benefit of our assertions and our our abilities. And again, I really don't want to misidentify motives, because I am absolutely convinced that almost all of what we do comes from a genuine space of altruistic kindness, a desire, a genuine desire to do good for others. And I do mean that. But more to the point, what we discover is that if we let go of that need to do all the time, that in fact our jobs become easier. Because there's less frenzy. There's less of a sense and feeling of panic about having to figure out what to do. So in fact our lives and our jobs become easier if we can lapse out about that a little bit. As one of the gentlemen mentioned, or somebody here mentioned already, really what we give, the most powerful forms of giving are the non-material things. We all know this. I mean, we know this. The gifts of caring, attention, affection, love, appreciation. I mean, think about that just by itself. Appreciation. What is one of the most powerful motivators for the work that we do as caregivers? Almost all of us are really heart-connecting people. And the gift that we give back is a sense of appreciation. You know how miffed you get when you feel like you're not appreciated? Well, we almost expect it, and it's a gift. Well, think about this. Turn it around. Think about what a profound gift you give to a person who needs a boost in their strength if you do nothing more than appreciate them. Find in them some kernel of a thing that you can appreciate authentically. Express it in whatever way is true for you. That will be a gift that far surpasses the bath that you gave. You know, really, that gift of appreciation is profound. Sometimes, often, the greatest good that we can do for another person is to not know what is good for them. Really. Because if we can stand with a person open and receptive, just really naked of all judgment, and just be there, and seek inside of them. Just hold inside of our heart a space of deep love and care, and have a longing to see what is true for this person, to help draw that out. That is the deepest gift in the world that we can give. Now, any of us who have been in a crisis situation with somebody that we deeply loved know this sensation. If you've ever been in a situation where you just stood there and it was so overwhelming, you really didn't know what to do anymore. You didn't know, and you just stood there. And you said, God, show me. And you're just open. And you have a deep longing to know, what can I do here? I'll tell you, in that moment, in that second, when you get to that place, you have gone from being a caregiver to being a healer. I thought I would end this talk today by doing an exercise with you. So, how many of you have done imagery before? Okay, good. So many of you. That's wonderful. All right. So as I was thinking about the tasks of the elderly, and I'm thinking about what might be a nice thing to really focus on in the here and now for all or any of us, this exercise came to mind. And I've been leading some variation on this exercise for over 20 years. I started out, I think, in the late 70s working with hospice, doing this exercise with groups, and I just find it very helpful. And it's a different variation every time I do it, but I think you'll enjoy it. First of all, before I do that, though, any other comments or any other thoughts or awarenesses or wisdom that any of you have to share amongst yourselves before we go into this exercise? Yes? Uh-huh.
I think the one thing that I try to remember when I work with the residents and the staff that I come in contact with every day is to not go into any situation with preconceived notions or ideas, but be open to listening and feeling from others, and then trying to incorporate that on a holistic team approach to whatever the situation or question, concern, problem, whatever you want to call it is.
Yes, and you find that to be useful.
Absolutely.
Yes. Could you all hear what she said? So one of the things that she has found to be very useful in working with staff where she works is to go into situations without, as much as possible, without a preconceived idea of what is best or what the deal is, and to ask, so that in team meetings and such, there's a real willingness to open up and ask for what is going on. Of course, as a way of life, this makes us a whole lot easier to get along with in general, right? So, all right. So this exercise I call a forgiveness exercise. Sometimes I've called it attitudinal healing. And you might want to have a writing utensil nearby, because sometimes if you go into this deeply enough, you'll have a slightly altered mind, and then you might like to write a few notes to yourself at the end so you remember whatever awareness that you have. And let's see how we're doing with time. Yeah, we've got plenty of time to do this. All right. So, is there a way to dim lights in this room or not? Anybody know? Clueless in... I think I won't worry about it. All right. So first thing to do, just see if there's anything that you're wearing that's poking or bothering you or is going to have you be uncomfortable, and undo it, loosen it. I've had some interesting questions at this point. Yes, whatever. And uncross your legs. Just let yourself get comfortable in the chair where you are. And I'll invite you just to settle back and close your eyes. Just close your eyes. And allow yourself to settle back in the chair and just take a few minutes to breathe deeply and notice that the chair is supporting you. Allow the sounds around you just to begin to drift away a little bit farther. And let yourself breathe deeply so it is as if your breath is going all the way down into your pelvic girdle. Become aware of any tightness or tension in your rib cage and your shoulders. And with a deep breath, just really let that go. Let it peel off of you. Like rolling butter, just peeling off of your shoulders. And sink back a little deeper into the chair. Again, become aware the chair really is supporting you. And feel your breath as if it could go all the way down to the soles of your feet. And all the way down into your wrists and your fingertips. Become aware it is as if there is a silver thread supporting the top of your head, so your neck can become very relaxed. And the mask of your face, whatever tensions, whatever face you've been holding on to, just let it melt away right now. Just let it melt away. And now in the very center of yourself, become aware of yourself, breathing deeply. And I want you to reflect now. Think about a situation in the last week or at least recent past where you felt a little miffed about something. Think about a situation that left you feeling a little angry or not so happy about something. And think about the central character in that, if there's one person that you can think about. Or if there's not a recent situation, just think about a person that you have had some trouble with in your life, that you don't feel completely resolved. And imagine that person now is standing right in front of you, and you continue breathing deeply and just letting yourself relax in the chair. But imagine that person is standing right in front of you. And notice that that person has a heart that is beating. Notice that that person is breathing. Notice that that person is living in a life of their own. That that person has hardship. Notice that that person has things that they deal with that they don't always know the answer to. And become aware now of your own heart beating. And imagine now in your heart that there is a golden light that is getting bigger and brighter. You can even feel it as a warmth in your chest. And allow your breath to magnify and allow this light, this warmth, to grow, become bigger, brighter. And imagine that a beam or a thread now goes out from your heart and touches into the heart of the person with whom you have some difficulty. Feel that connection as if it were a vibration, touching that heart. Feel the connection of that heart. And notice that heart also becoming brighter. If you can, in your heart, hold an intentionality of goodwill and a wish for this person to know how to do their life in a very kind way. In a very kind way. And then feel coming back from that person's heart, a beam right back to your heart. And here's the tricky part. Let it in. Let it in. Let yourself receive what is in the heart and from the heart of this person. I'm going to invite you to very gently open your eyes and make some notes to yourself. Make some notes to yourself about this. I'm going to just be quiet for a minute or two and let yourself make some notes. All right, any comments that anybody would like to make? I'm nearing the very end here, and so I've got a few minutes left. Any comments that anybody would like to make here at the end?
Wow.
Good. Yeah, good. This exercise, I guarantee you that if you do this exercise every day for a week, it will completely transform the situation that you're in. So if you're in a difficult situation, I encourage the practice of this particular exercise. It will completely transform the situation for you. Of course, it transforms you in the middle of it, but that's how we transform everything anyway, right? All right. Yes?
I was just thinking how great it would be with practice this self-articulated acceptance of the Kim Jong-il.
Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great? Did you hear what she said? Wouldn't it be wonderful in diplomatic meetings if they didn't sort of start out by doing this exercise? You know, I lead all business meetings that I lead by starting an exercise of meditation, and it makes a nice difference. You really feel like people are working together if you center in together. Those of you who work with me know you're smiling at me. All right. Well, thank you all very much. This has been a deep pleasure to be here with you.